Alexis, thank you for coming back on Scandal. We love getting to talk to you. And today's kind of a fun one, talking about old P. Diddy videos. And as I'm rewatching these, I'm thinking, is this just Hollywood's best kept secret? Like we knew, but we didn't know kind of thing?
I think Hollywood knew this the whole time. I think it sounds like that everybody out there in that circle knew this was going on. As the general public, we didn't know.
And I'm wondering about that now because it's like hindsight is 2020 when I'm going back and watching these videos like with Justin Bieber and I'm like, okay, he's a young kid and did he saying some kind of wild and outlandish things? Should we have known?
That's a very good question, but like you just said, Sierra, hindsight is 2020. So, I mean, should we have known? I don't know because I think some of it we thought was just that whole trying to put on that persona, that partying persona, and who they were trying to put out there to the public. So I don't know. I think now, as we're hearing that this is such a commonplace with Weinstein, and other individuals that have come out that this was going on, I think now we're on more of a high alert when comments like that are being made.
And we do have to remember and give ourselves some form of grace because the videos we're talking about are like early 2000s. In this episode, we have videos going back to like 2002. And this is far before we've heard about Me Too. We're in a much different society now where we can say, okay, that was kind of inappropriate. But at the time, it wasn't as much. It might have sounded odd, but these parties, these white parties, Diddy would go on like Conan or Ellen and talk about them, and people would laugh. They would laugh at things that are now kind of inappropriate. And I guess just generally, I'm wondering if, in preparation for the current case that we're in right now, the federal trial, would prosecutors go through and take a look at these things?
I think prosecutors definitely have gone through and taken a look at it. When you have a case, one of the things, even if it's like a simple car accident, the insurance companies will go through and look at that person's social media. Or are they claiming that they had an injury, for instance, to their back, and now they're on a roller coaster or dancing on top, of a bar top? So they do go and look at those things. The question really is, A, is the prosecution going to utilize that and show them in court as evidence? And B, are they able to, based on the rules of evidence, to even get it in, even if they wanted to?
Okay, that's my question because so far we haven't seen, and I guess when I say we haven't seen, no one except for the people inside of the courtroom have seen, but we haven't heard the reports that these clips have been shown, anything like that. Is there a reason why they might not have been shown?
Well, the first thing that they have to overcome is, are they relevant to the allegations of the case? So, the videos that I have seen, a lot of them, although they are surprising, and you're like, oh, I can't believe they said this and this was going on. And it seems like, Hollywood as a whole was kind of just brushing this under the rug. But I'm not sure that they're relevant specifically to the allegations, because the fact that he was having a party, and the comment, for instance, that he would make the room hot for his parties and turn down the air, or that he made sure there was water, that doesn't really go towards and be it's relevant to the actually charges that we have now. If there were charges on the state level before the statute of limitations had run out, then in those cases, possibly that we would have that they would be relevant and be able to come in.
Now that you're talking about that, we have that specific little clip in this very episode talking about keeping it hot. And it made me think of a Friends episode where Joey is like trying to turn up the heat in his apartment so that the models take off their clothes. Yeah, okay, you might know about it. And so, like, now I would be like, okay, that's gross. Like, why are we doing that? But at the time, people laughed and people loved it and it was a thing. So I feel like maybe it kind of goes to like time and place for that one also. And then I guess I'm wondering on the opposite side with the defense. I don't know, to your point, I don't know that these necessarily would boost the government's case, but could it potentially boost the defense's case in the way that, okay, he's just a partying kind of a guy and he invites people to the parties. We've seen the videos. He invited Ellen to the party or, talking to Conan about it and was very open that, okay, they're kind of wild. This is just the way that it is and it's all consensual. So could it be useful for the defense?
Well, I wanted to touch on the Friends episode. That was first. That was
Oh,
a very good point because I think even if we look back at movies from the 80s, as the kids would say, the young kids, it was cringe. I mean, it's
yeah.
cringe. With my kids, I have to have discussions. They were like, "Why was that funny? Why was that okay?" So I do think there is a change in society that we're becoming more aware. With regard to the, for the defense, whether these would be for the defense, I'm not so sure. I think even when you look at them now, you're kind of like, you step back and say to yourself, like we had mentioned earlier, why didn't we really think this was an issue when it was initially said? Was there consent? I think, some of the videos we're talking about, and he admits in the video, there are various levels to the parties. So we kind of get insight into that the party, the Ellen clip that you're referring to, it gets into that. He says, okay, it starts off and the party is, this type of party, and then the party kind of escalates into something else as it goes throughout the night, which the testimony that we're hearing in the trial kind of supports that there was that evolution and that he had different types of parties. So I'm not so sure that that's going to support the consent end, because we also have this underlying that he wasn't necessarily talking about, that he, the allegation that he was drugging these people. So, if you're drugging someone and they're not aware of being drugged, for instance, you have a problem with consent on the defense side.
Okay, to your point with all of that, with the alleged drugging, there's another video that we had too that showed someone who Diddy was like, "Oh, this was a DJ. He was at my party." And he slumped over on a couch, a sofa of some sort. And Diddy is basically saying, "Oh, this is what happens when you come to my parties." Like he completely passed out. They're like holding a drink on this man's head,
Mhm.
like things you almost think about at like a childhood sleepover where you like put somebody's hand in like water and see if they'll pee their pants or whatever, like things like that. However, it's not a kid asleep. It's a person who's so inebriated that they've literally fallen over. So to me, that from the outset looks bad. I don't know if we could jump to this person being drugged, but is that something that could be of discussion?
So, if, for instance, if they had that particular individual, and I'm not sure who that individual is, but they had that individual come in and testify because maybe they were testifying to what you were saying, to prove the elements of the actual charges, I think that's what we need to focus on. I mean, this all is. I think we can agree, the majority of society, that this just is, these are horrible things that were going on. So I think that if you had the individual say, we were trying to support that that individual was trafficked, or that there was some sort of crime against that individual going towards the RICO, and then part of their testimony to get in that video, then yes, it would support it. But we can't just bring in videos that kind of shock our conscience. They have to be brought in for a purpose. And the first thing to overcome is, well, whether it's relevant, and then the next thing, we have to be able to bring it in, supporting the rules of evidence. So whether it's allowed to be admissible. So I mean, we have those different factors, but I think if that individual was on the witness list, then they could. It would be easier to be able to bring that video in to testify that, oh, he didn't know that he had been given drugs, and now here's like how he appeared. He wasn't aware that happened. Those sort of things. It's context, the context of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really like the way that you explained all of that because to somebody who's not super familiar with law, it's like, okay, why wouldn't we bring into those videos? Like, why wouldn't those be shown to the jurors? And you're right, we can't just show it to them to shock them and make them feel like, oh, here's what happened. It has to be admissible. And so you did a great job of explaining that. And I love that. But my next question, too, is we have a celebrity who's on trial here. So the jurors going into it, even in jury selection voir dire back in the day, I mean, I say back in the day, it was 6 weeks ago. It just feels like it's been like a year at this point. But when the jurors were, going through jury selection, a lot of them were like, yeah, we know this guy. He's been famous for, since the 90s. We know who he is. He has a reputation for partying. So I'm wondering if way in the past, these people, maybe they were watching Conan O'Brien back in 2002, or they saw him at the Grammys or whatever, and they heard all of these things about, just in the zeitgeist that Diddy is this partier. Does that now affect them in a way?
I think anytime you have a celebrity that's on trial, I mean, you look back at the Michael Jackson case, or, Johnny Depp, anytime
Mhm.
there's a celebrity, and like you said, you brought up an excellent point, because you see this person, even though you may not have ever met them, you almost feel like they're your friend or your
Mhm.
family, and you can have that situation. So getting a conviction of a celebrity, it does make it more difficult for the prosecution, because you kind of put them on a pedestal, and you want to make excuses like you're saying, okay, yeah, he partied and he had these crazy, elaborate, expensive parties with all the people that these individuals may have looked up to were at these parties. So you kind of have to overcome that. Whereas if it was just, say, an everyday person like you or me, and it comes out we were having these types of parties, the prosecution wouldn't have to overcome that. So I do think it does play in. It's not supposed to, but we're all human, and the individuals on the jury are human. So those type of things do play into that.
And this is something we've heard in testimony too. Multiple people have said the phrase that he is larger than life. I mean, not only is he like recognizable by the way he looks or his voice, his singing, we know him from those things, but also the way that he acts. He is this person that's much different, as you say, than you or I. Like his lifestyle, just generally putting aside these allegations, is different than ours. I don't have access to a private jet. I don't have multiple homes, it's just different. So I do think that the jurors rather are going to have to think about that even if they shouldn't be. It just is kind of in the back of their mind. And I guess that goes to a more general question. We're in the government's case moving slowly into the defenses. What do you think so far? Has the government brought a strong case?
So I believe that they have. I think that they have hit all of the marks. I call it the Rico bingo card, and they've hit the trafficking, and they've hit the prostitution. I do. The question for me is, Rico is a hard one. The other two, I think that there's a high probability they're going to get a conviction on the lessers. The RICO is hard for a jury. Jurors don't really necessarily understand RICO, and they're asking, okay, you have to have this enterprise. Why aren't there other defendants? And that
Right.
was a strategy that the government doesn't have to bring in the other co-conspirators or the other members of the enterprise. And it was a strategic decision. I mean, if you look at the Young Thug case, they brought in so many people, and that case was supposed to go on for years, and it
Oh,
just
yeah.
confused everything. So I think they were trying to simplify it. But by doing that, it raised a lot of questions about that element of enterprise. Like, why don't we have this? And I think they need KK. I really do think the prosecution, and I'm not sure if they're going to bring her up, but they do need his assistant, KK.
At the time you and I are talking right now, Brendan Paul is testifying. It could be even going into the lunch hour at this point, but he's finally on the stand after much anticipation. And KK is the question. I have done so many interviews here on Scandal, and basically everyone we've talked to, we're like, yep, it's just a matter of time. Like, she is going to take the stand. She's got to be huge for the prosecution. She could be a co conspirator. So why wouldn't she flip and testify for the government? And yet we haven't seen her.
Mhm.
So they're supposed to wrap their case either today or on Monday. Why wouldn't we have heard from her from the government?
So there's various reasons. Now, she may not have, as you said, flipped and then gotten herself immunity. She may, if they put her on the stand, they may know that she's going to plead the fifth. Um, she may not have the knowledge that the prosecution needs that there's various reasons not to put her on the stand. She may make a bad witness. She may have told them, I'm just going to go and say that there wasn't an enterprise. We don't know, because we don't have that information from that investigation. That's what comes out in this trial. I think at this point the question is the defense going to put her on, the way
Mhm.
this is playing out? But I agree, from the get-go, I thought for sure the prosecution was going to put her on. And I do think that it would be beneficial if she was going to, as you said, flip, to the case, because that enterprise element, I mean, as a lawyer, I think they've met it, but I'm not so sure that a layperson is necessarily going to think and that the enterprise is there without these other people.
I mean, these are a jury of Sean Diddy Combs's peers. And it's interesting because he's on his private jet and some of them are working for like a deli or an architect. Like they're his peers, but they have much different lives than he lives. And to your point about the racketeering being hard to wrap your brain around, I mean, I've even struggled with all of this going through and, trying to be a juror in my own mind, even though I'm not sitting on the jury. What would they think? Is this a yes or a no? Like, as far as a conviction for it. So I think you're right. That is really tricky. I'll be interested to see what happens when it comes time for deliberation. I'm going to wrap up though and ask you one more question. Circling back to P. Diddy, these clips we've seen of him, his reputation, I'm going to say, has potentially been pretty much tarnished at this point. But let's just say that he has an acquittal. Could his reputation, do you think, ever recover?
Yes. And the
Oh,
reason I say that is I definitely think it can, because look at Michael Jackson. You see these various stars that they take the heat, and then then they make this comeback. The public forgets, and then they realize, because many people, even with these allegations, still believe from a business standpoint that P. Diddy is a business genius at what he does. And so, the public forgets, they move on. There's another scandal to focus
okay.
on. And I do believe that if he got acquitted, he could recover. Now, it won't happen overnight, but he could recover. But, we also can't forget there's a lot. He's still going to take a financial hit. This is probably, I'm guessing, costing him 100,000 plus a day in legal fees, and obviously people pulled out of businesses and so forth. So financially, I think initially he's going to take a hit. And we also have those civil cases. Remember, there's a lot of civil cases that are still out there that he could continue to take a financial hit, but his reputation, I think he could possibly recover from that after a couple years.